today's guest, Jamie Turner.
We do see some statistics in the HR industry where early HR professionals are leaving the industry overall because maybe they weren't sure it was the right choice, because first coming in to this environment, they feel like it's too much, it's too emotional, it's too difficult to handle, and you need some emotional intelligence, but you also need some cycles behind you to see that there are going to be scale up and scale down times, and you need to just kind of get through some of those cycles to then have a little bit more of a mature way to look at it. But if you're in an HR leadership role, recognizing that there may be some people on your team who haven't had those cycles yet and haven't had to go through those changes of such scale, even if it's just one resignation in the month, that can be difficult for the person who maybe spent all that time onboarding them and they feel personally left behind. It may have been a good friend of theirs, it may have been a good colleague or someone they really enjoyed being in meetings with or having a coffee with, whatever it might be. So recognize that the HR professionals are really, they're feeling it too. Change fatigue is affecting them. How can you battle it? Talk about it. Make sure they know the value of the role, help them, remind them of the value they bring every time, and help them as a group support one another. As you said, set up the partnerships within the organization to best really recognize how you can provide those transactional things for them what they might need on an ad hoc basis with changes that come up. And that's just some first, fundamental steps that you can do as an HR leader within an HR team.
Jamie and I talked about change fatigue, especially a lot of change happened over the past 3 years to organizations and HR professionals. And we had seen ups and downs, inflation, COVID, the Great Resignation. And we also talked about the importance of transactional work still, plus also partnerships and many HR tips from her experienced viewpoint, as she worked at global levels since years. So it's a really insightful episode for everyone who wants to understand more about the HR function and how it developed in the past recent years.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Great, Jamie, to have you here again. We met already at several occasions. I think 1.5 years ago, roughly, when you with ID Now organized a dinner, and we with PeopleWise supported you still then. And then
That's
suddenly
right.
we did a CHRO dinner where you also were there. And now we are here doing podcasting today. So I'm looking forward to that. And maybe we can start a bit with an introduction about yourself. So give us a bit about context of what you did, who you are, and let's maybe start with that.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Thomas. Anyways, first, want to say thank you for having me on today. It's really exciting to be here, and it's been really nice getting to know you and your team, and happy to be here today. About myself, just very briefly, my background, you can probably tell by my accent, I am born and raised in America, my hometown in Michigan, and I spent there, the very early years of my career working on generalist roles in HR. Spent a lot of time finding my way and just getting exposed to a lot of different kinds of roles in HR, but mainly with a generalist focus in a very large automotive organization, which then I had a great opportunity to take an expat assignment over here in Berlin. So I moved over here in 2003, so it's now 20 years. At that time, I was diving into development topics, and I was mainly focusing on transition management, so those that are moving from individual contributor to manager for the first time. So I spent 3 years of my life in the classroom with all new leaders, taking them through different sets of curriculum to help them develop their management skills and reflect and develop and create career paths for them. So that was a lot of fun. And then I moved to Vienna, moved to Austria, where I was there working also for a very large company in the oil and gas industry. And there I took on a role to manage the entire learning and development department. We went through some M&A with another very large organization in Romania. So I spent a lot of time in Bucharest, lived there for almost a year in a hotel, which was a lot of fun, and built up their learning and development from a group perspective across their 50,000 employees collectively in that organization. And then I moved back to Berlin, where my heart has been for a very long time. And also my husband and I, we have children, so we wanted to raise them here in the diverse city of Berlin. So we got back here in 2014, and that's when I switched to more of a generalist role within HR, but in terms of strategic HR. So I started to work in the entertainment industry in a post-production environment where my boss was based in the headquarters in LA. We did a lot of work with the Hollywood studios. We had Fortune 500 companies working with us, and we had, very big names that we were working together with. Our organization was all over the globe. We had 50 some locations. I was responsible for HR for 23 locations in Europe, and that's where I had like all HR matters, anything to do and everything to do with HR. So that was, again, kind of taking my scope rather more into a broad spectrum, but at a strategic management level in the VP level. Then I moved over about 2 years ago to accept a challenge with a company in a startup phase who was just sort of getting into the scale up phase of their startup. And that was a lot of fun to take on because they needed that generalist VP view, strategic long-term focus on what to build for their future based on where they were and where they wanted to go. So I had to take on a completely different sort of challenge in a different environment, build up the team from scratch, put in the fundamentals of HR practices that would last them long-term and bring in some sustainable solutions for them. So that's where I'm at. That's 25 years or so in the HR area, and really spanning across mainly Europe for the last 20 years, but having a lot of experience in American environments and companies as well.
Nice. So you have a ton of experience, and now I would like to hear a bit more about what you think with your experienced view on certain also recent developments, maybe, because I think the whole people HR field, especially in the past, I would say 3 years, really went through a lot, or over organizations overall, but then derived to that, I think the HR function had a lot of ups and downs to deal with. The whole topic around this great resignation, inflation now, COVID. So how do you look at all these topics from your perspective? That would be super interesting.
Yeah, it's great to talk about this because I know that this is something that you see and feel from your company and the services that you offer back to your clients as well. And from my perspective, over the years, seeing this develop and continuously, bring us into a new set of circumstances, there are a lot of things going on. And, there's a lot of discussion on how this is actually impacting the HR community and the HR individuals and professionals that are out there on the front lines, if you will, of all this change. So that's something that I like to look at. Obviously, we focus in our HR profession on supporting the manager, supporting the strategy of the organization, and putting that in balance what the managers, the employees, and our clients need, always having that in balance. But certainly I also have to look out for, the HR professionals, and I look at, well, what is happening to our industry of HR because of these changes. So that's where I would put my answers for this podcast, rather focused on how it's impacting HR professionals. Okay. And I think that I'm seeing, I don't know if you're also seeing this working with your team, but I am seeing certainly a lot of discussion in the HR communities around change fatigue of HR professionals. Seeing a lot of white papers out there about this, a lot of just discussions on webinars and different types of platforms and medias around how employees are getting change fatigue because their organizations are changing so much, their family situations are changing so much, or their surroundings are changing so much. And then when you have something really small happen, like, construction gets set up out in front of your house, you just lose it, right? Because patience isn't there anymore because there's just so much volume of change.
Mm.
So if you think about the HR professional who's dealing with supporting that change with the manager, supporting the change with the employees, the HR professional also is quite impacted. I had this situation a couple of weeks back where I just by chance struck up a conversation with someone and found out that she was in HR in a recruiting position. And I said, well, tell me about what you do. Tell me what you're seeing on the market and how it is for you. And she said she didn't know what my profession was yet in this exchange. And she said, well, I'm in HR. I'm pretty early in HR, about 5 years in doing recruiting. And she said, but I'm really tired. And she just kind of like let out this big sigh. And my heart just kind of went out to her. I was like, you're only 5 years in. This should be like your motivation time. This should be the exciting time, like your prime, like you hit the ground running and you're just learning how stuff goes and you're seeing cycles and stuff. But she was really losing heart. And she started to explain to me, seeing people that she placed in roles already leaving their roles, and people who she would then, talk to on the market looking for new roles and why they were looking, and just internalizing a lot of their decisions to change in their lives was affecting her personally in her work. And she was just feeling so deflated by so much change and so much volume of work, like constantly the manager's calling her, asking her to do new recruiting projects with them. And there's another vacancy, or working with her to achieve some of the changes that they have long term, but having to deal with all of the day-to-day changes in the staff. So I don't know which industry she was in or which company she was working for, but it certainly was affecting her ability to do her job well.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jamie, I think this is also what I see and saw, especially when there was COVID. Suddenly, everybody feared their job in recruiting, for instance, or in HR maybe less, but in the recruiting side, yes. And out of a sudden, there was a ramp up like never before, especially in the tech field, where everybody needs to hire like crazy. I had clients where we had recruiters in there, where some people handled 40 requisitions at a time. But it was not like one job and 40 openings to fill within this one job. It was maybe 30 different jobs and 10 to 15 different managers. It's just not possible to deliver on that, especially if additionally to that, all the things are changing on a bi-weekly basis, maybe.
Yeah.
So that's tough. And then later on, we are coming into the point of inflation, where you had a crazy, crazy time, and maybe really 50% of the people you then hired as a recruiter are getting laid off. It's not nice to see that, but that was the reality of the past 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And so
you've seen that obviously within your teams and your clients, and they're scaling up and then scaling down, and they're scaling up, they're scaling down, and I think that's where we're seeing organizations just trying to really build sustainable growth, and that's tough to do when the environments around you are changing constantly. And that's where I see the HR professionals who may be 5 years in or maybe 25 years in, just I guess today I was just hoping if there's any listeners here today feeling that I could offer some words of advice to just, find a way to compartmentalize and recognize what you're there to do in your role. And that will help one to understand the value that they bring and understand where they can actually bring a solution or solve that particular issue. And I think one way to do that, one way to look at it, just to be a little bit more specific about it and not so vague or strategic about it, but I've been part of a lot of different team events where I've found that a very successful exercise can be one where a team just talks out loud about their own roles, what they think is the most important thing in their job, what the purpose is of their job, and what they personally then bring to the role because of their experience or their perspective or mindset or skill set. And hearing that out loud amongst your team, if you're an HR team looking for something to do on your next workshop, your team building, it's a great way to do. It's a great way to bring the reminder of the value that every HR professional brings to their role. Because if you can keep that in mind when you're dealing with all of these changes, like, okay, the value I bring in this role is helping this person through transition. It's really tough. They've just gotten the news that they got laid off, or that they need to, pack up their things and go, or they have, a month to hand it over. Their position was cut, budgets were cut, whatever it might be. But that individual is talking to an HR professional for help to get through that situation. So the transition means, paperwork and making sure payroll's correct and all that stuff. But it is also listening to them, giving them some support and giving them some ideas for how they can actually go home and communicate this to maybe their partner. It's a very difficult time, and offering support through that transition is the role of the HR person at that moment. And yes, it's hard if, for on that HR person, if that's a long list of people that you need to do that with, because there was a big budget cut and there's a lot of people being let go. And I have, in the history of my job, in my profession, I have been exposed to obviously large layoffs. That's tough on the HR function, but you can get through it by knowing without you, that person wouldn't have had someone to talk to, or maybe they wouldn't have had the ability to think about how they're going to go home and deliver the message that they lost their job, or they maybe wouldn't have confidence that their last paycheck was going to be correct, or maybe the paperwork wasn't all going to be done for healthcare, whatever it might be. That's the value that you bring in your HR role. So compartmentalizing what you're there for and the value that you bring can, offer you the support to get through that moment, or to get through those being on the forefront of change.
I think that's important for.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's important really for also three types of relationships to the HR role. So maybe to the peers within the whole HR field, like talent acquisition, maybe an HR ops role or a learning and development role, for instance, plus the HR function towards managers and towards employees. Because I think what I often see is that the conversations that are happening within these departments are more, or stakeholders are more activity based or input based. Can you do that and that for me now? Open that role for me. Is the payroll already done? Or please also onboard this person. This person needs to start tomorrow. Okay, out of a sudden nobody knew, but person needs to start tomorrow, right? So I think this is what I often see, and this creates a lot of friction. And I think the tip you just gave is really good for that, because it takes the conversations to a different level where everybody understands we all want the same. We just do different things to achieve that. Let's get a bit of empathy towards each other's situation and understand, how do I need to operate that I best enable you, that you best enable me? Mm-hmm. And this is where collaboration then works, and where you suddenly maybe do the same things as before, but have a way different experience.
Yeah. And so much of HR is partnership. And I recognize that, a lot of organizations kind of look at that differently depending on their size and the stage that they're in and so on. But and there is a lot of transactional work that needs to be done, but that is equally valuable to any sort of change, whether it's scale up or scale down, and really being able to look at your role like, well, it seems like a lot of transactional work or a lot of administrative work, but without that, there is not the same value to that person going through the exit or the onboarding. So, yeah, I think if you're in a role, you have the ability to talk with your teams, and in a setting like a team building. If you're in an HR leadership role, I would advise to look into this sort of newish phenomenon around change fatigue, because it's also starting to spill into compassion fatigue, which means, like this girl I spoke to, a little bit losing heart. We do see some statistics in the HR industry where early HR professionals are leaving the industry overall because maybe they weren't sure it was the right choice, because first coming in, to this environment. They feel like it's too much, it's too emotional, it's too difficult to handle, and you need some emotional intelligence, but you also need some cycles behind you to see that there are going to be scale up and scale down times, and you need to just kind of get through some of those cycles to then have a little bit more of a mature way to look at it. But if you're in an HR leadership role, recognizing that there may be some people on your team who haven't had those cycles yet and haven't had to go through those changes of such scale, even if it's just one resignation in the month, that can be difficult for the person who maybe spent all that time onboarding them and they feel personally left behind. It may have been a good friend of theirs, it may have been a good colleague or someone they really enjoyed being in meetings with or having a coffee with, whatever it might be. So recognize that the HR professionals are really, they're feeling it too. Change fatigue is affecting them. How can you battle it? Talk about it. Make sure they know the value of the role, help them, remind them of the value they bring every time, and help them as a group support one another. As you said, set up the partnerships within the organization to best really recognize how you can provide those transactional things for them what they might need on an ad hoc basis with changes that come up. And that's just some first, fundamental steps that you can do as an HR leader within an HR team.
What else could you do?
Well, I think more on a strategic level, working with your executive and management team on balancing and managing change and priorities of change. So large scale, right now it's kind of budget season, right? Everybody's looking at what do we need to prepare for 2024, and you're looking at your strategies and you're building up what the targets of the organization are, and therefore how are support functions like HR going to contribute to achieving those targets. So in those discussions, I would suggest bringing up the real effect to the organization on change fatigue, and bringing up, maybe have some extra time to look into your attrition statistics, but also where there might be trends. Were they people who left early in their in their tenure with the company, or their specific roles that are affected more than other, or is it spread across the whole organization? And try and get into some of the details of what's causing that. But it may just be general change overall. It may not be like poor management skills. It just might be the environment of constant change, because what may have seemed normal in terms of amount of OKRs you can achieve in a quarter or a year in previous years isn't normal anymore, because there's so much change on the environment in the industry and at home and in personal lives. So we have to scale back or have more realistic timelines in place and just stretch them out a little bit. Really think through impact of the communication when you're asking behaviors to change, managers and employees to actually do something differently. Maybe build into those time plans different longer time plans is what I try to say. And also build in some more mechanisms for that change management, which may have been in previous times easy to do with one workshop in a team. You might actually need two in these days because there's so much change around.
Definitely. And do you think that there is also some change fatigue happening on the management side, or don't you see it that much on managers?
Well, I certainly can comment on the management team that I work with right now, and in this environment, I see strong, highly skilled individuals who are able to kind of see into the future and set direction and change direction and be agile. And I see that continuously. I think outside of my organization, if I look at, Gartner published something pretty recently about this, and talking about how, change fatigue is usually they'll point in management to blame for the change fatigue that employees are facing. But I don't really think it's the right way to point blame at a manager for decisions of making changes. You have to be agile in these times. You have to recognize something's working or not working, because you have to react to what's happening in your market, of course. So yeah, maybe there is some additional effect psychologically coming into that level of executive and management suite and organizations. But from my perspective, I'm seeing people who are really good at that flourish in these times. And the best way to be successful in that kind of role, in that capacity, is to really focus on communication and how you communicate, how it's going to affect the organization. Because no matter what, you can go out in an all hands and you can say something that you think is really positive news, and then you get feedback later in the week that someone twisted that and thought it was something negative, in fact. So we do have to be very careful with our messaging, with all the good intentions that we might have in our all hands. It certainly can be read between the lines, or people can take different messages out of that. So spend a little extra time on the communication strategy, do dry runs with people, check with different pockets of the organization how they might receive the change before. So it's just a few extra steps that I would recommend taking. But I certainly feel like, it's time to flourish if that's one of your key competencies or skill sets.
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
And I think you could also really see that maybe then in pulse surveys, right? If you do that regularly, that maybe also the kind of mood goes down, or the level of maybe excitement or confidence or whatever you're measuring should be, or is most likely affected in times of change fatigue, or if just too much change is happening over time, and therefore there is a misalignment happening, because then at some point, if you're switching from direction A to B and then to C, it might sometimes make sense to just iterate and make it easy and simple for yourself, but it's not that for the people not driving this and are top of mind. So I think if you're not top of mind of changes and not feel that you are a participant of the change journey, then this goes into a wrong direction, and this is then actually the opposite what you will achieve, and that's resignation, frustration, no buy-ins, no excitement, open questions,
Right.
inefficiency.
Yeah. But I think that also goes towards a direction, which may be a different topic for a different podcast, but about being in the office and being near people and being able to talk about those things. So, being fully at home, being isolated, and then having those feelings and not being part of the change and not being brought along can be amplified because you're isolated, right? So, we're seeing a lot of that evidence coming through now as well, and companies are doing, taking different approaches to that. But certainly think that in order to support managers who might be feeling change fatigue, because maybe it isn't something that they're good at, being agile and continuously making change, would be in the area of the learning and development professionals. Because if you're responsible for developing a management program or keeping it maintained and facilitating one or rolling one out, whatever it might be, my advice would be to make sure that you build in additional weight on the topic of coaching as a manager, because they should be able to talk with their employees on an individual basis as well, with tools that come from coaching to help them through the change. Not every manager knows how to do that. Not every manager has been trained or shown tools how to do that. So I think that that's going to become more and more needed in the next coming years, especially here in 2024, because I believe that managers really who can take a human-centric approach to their management style will succeed in all of these environmental changes in society and the changes that the organizations need to go through, whether it's scale up or scale down. If you have a human-centric approach to your management style, you'll be able to pick up on things that are happening within your teams before they become devastating or someone just resigns out of your complete surprise.
Definitely. Thank for your insights. So who is somebody that I don't know yet, that I should interview next?
Well, I wanted to mention that we as HR professionals should also really consider bringing in support for our management and employees around their mental health. And I'll come to the person's name in just a moment. But the reason why I'm making the connection here is because I think it's very important for employees to know they have a place to go, also outside of their HR organization, to get help when they need it. And it may not be help that they need right now, but just to join roundtables of other managers talking about their issues they're having, or maybe it's a webinar that's talking about, hey, how do you deal with managing a team across all different countries on a virtual basis? How do you include them when they're outside of the office and you have people in the office? So now you have a very hybrid approach you have to apply a hybrid approach to your management style. Maybe you want to attend some yoga sessions. Maybe you need a therapy session one-on-one. So you can find providers that offer these health services, which can help managers or employees. Your HR professionals can also make great use of these kinds of services just through, working with companies like Nilo Health. So I've recently gotten to know co-founder and co-CEO Ines Rath, and she's the person that I would like to recommend for you to meet, Thomas, because with her vision and her ideas, she brought mental health to the forefront, and now it's sort of a common benefit that you find, at least in the tech in the tech industry, that's a common benefit that's offered. And I think we're seeing more and more employees engage in those preventative measures just to prevent issues that may come in future if they hadn't someone to talk to about their stresses or something they're facing. So I'd say give a call over to Ines at Nilo Health. I think she'd be a great partner, maybe for you to interview on a future podcast.
Sure, I would love to do so and will do so. So thanks, Jamie, for your time and all the insights. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thank you. I look forward to it again. Thanks, Thomas.
Yes, see you. Bye.
Okay, see you.